Good evening, everyone. I'm Charles Overby, chairman of the Overby Center for Southern Journalism and Politics. I'm delighted to welcome you here. We have a distinguished panel and distinguished audience. We have the class that Curtis and I teach on presidential campaigns and the media, and they all knew exactly what was going to happen on Tuesday night because they were so expertly taught by Curtis. We want to welcome our television audience as well, and I'd like to introduce the panel, and then we'll get right into it. To my left, only geographically,
that's the truth,
is Will Feltus of Washington, D.C. Will has good Mississippi roots. He worked for Senator Thad Cochran, and he works for a Republican consulting firm in Washington that specializes in media research, media buying, and advertising. And then next, we have Alan Huffman and Michael Rejebian. Right. Michael and Alan. You two kind of go together, so I could introduce you separately, but you came together. They wrote this book, We're With Nobody.
But they are tonight. There
was somebody's tonight. And so they have developed a national reputation for opposition research. And so we're going to learn a lot from these three panelists. And then Curtis Wilkie, you all know, of course. Curtis has covered 8 presidential elections as the national political correspondent for the Boston Globe. And he's seen these come and go, and he has great perspective. I want to start with Will. Will was actually in Boston election night at the Romney headquarters.
Yeah, I was.
And I guess I'd like to start out by saying, did the Romney people really think they were going to win? And describe the scene for us as the evening progressed.
Now, we really thought we were going to win. I got up there Monday evening and drove up to Manchester, New Hampshire to the last rally. And it was like so much energy. It was like 10,000 people. The fire marshal was sending people away, and Kid Rock had his whole band there, and laser beams were going off, and we really thought we were going to win. I mean, even during the day Tuesday, there was this sense of momentum, which started after the first debate. And then Tuesday night, we're watching the results, and it looks like every other presidential, the same thing. The same things were happening that had happened before. The states that were supposed to be close were close. There was no good surprise. There was no Pennsylvania being close, or Wisconsin, or Michigan. And, and then about 12, they called Ohio. And I didn't even go to the concession speech. I just started walking to find a cab and go back to my hotel. And it was very disappointing. A friend of mine who's the deputy campaign manager said that she had asked Mitt on the plane Monday if he thought he was going to win or not. And he said, I don't know. He said, I don't know if I'm going to win. He said, if I win, we have a lot of work to do. And if I lose, I'll be very glad to get back to my life. Mm-hmm. And watching the concession speech, it was sort of clear to me that he really didn't look like he'd actually had one prepared.
He said he didn't, but you think he really didn't? Mm-hmm.
I don't think he did.
Mm-hmm. So Will was disappointed and surprised on the downside. Michael, were you surprised on the upside?
I think that towards the end, some different things happened that kind of gave an indication that Obama may be okay. The storm certainly didn't hurt him. It took away a lot of Romney's momentum, I think. He wasn't able to campaign like he wanted to when he had that momentum. And, for me, just watching him on Election Day out there still campaigning, I know a lot of people said, well, he's just trying to hedge his bets, but, I think he was feeling it. And then when you found out later that their own internal polling had showed that he was down 5 points in Ohio, and they had not obviously said this earlier, I think they must have thought that it wasn't going, quite the way they wanted it to go. So,
Alan, were you surprised by anything election night?
I'm always surprised on election night. I never. Everybody thinks because you do opposition research that you have some special knowledge, which we do actually, but it doesn't always translate into the outcome of elections. So just because you think, well, this candidate clearly has more negatives than the other doesn't mean that that candidate's going to lose. So, and in fact, whenever I hear people saying that they're confident that their candidate is going to win, it makes me very nervous. And I think it goes back to after, just in just general disclosure, I worked at the Clarion Ledger when Charles was the executive editor, and when I left there, I went to work first for the Attorney General and then for Mississippi Governor Ray Mabus, and everybody thought he was going to be reelected. It was like everywhere you went, I'm not worried about it, and then he was defeated. And we actually went into doing opposition research after that because Michael and I were both reporters at the Clarion Ledger, and we had basically journalist investigative skills, and then I went to work for Mavis and Michael went to work for Mayor Jackson, and so we had some journalism background, and so we started doing that after in the early 90s, but I still I'm not confident about how most elections are going to turn out. That's not my job, and I've been surprised too many times. So Michael was confident about Obama. We're Democrats, basically. We'll work for Republicans in a primary race where there's no opponent, and technically we are objective because if you are running for Congress or whatever and hire us, we do the same research that we would do on your opponent, we do on you. So we get to see basically everybody naked. But in the we're not going to work against a Democrat. That's our realm. That's our ideology. That's our network. So I was hoping that Obama would win, but I wasn't really confident. So it was pretty late in the night before I breathed a sigh of relief.
Curtis, you covered 8 elections. How did this election compare to other elections that you covered?
I think they're all different. You're asking about surprises, and I think I've been so inured to the idea that Democrats can't carry the South that I was surprised that Obama this time carried both Florida and Virginia. Mm-hmm. Of course, he did before too, but there were different circumstances, and the demographics change, and the demographics of those two states have changed so much over the years from the time that I first started covering politics. And that's something I think we need to take into account, and I gather the Republicans probably didn't take some of this into account as much as they should have.
Well, let's pick up, Will, on what Curtis said about how the expectation that the Republicans would carry the South, not the Democrats. I think before, North Carolina, Virginia, Florida were seen as a fluke. Does the outcome in Florida and Virginia mean that was not a fluke and that the Democrats can begin to count on some of these southern states?
I mean, we'll have to see. Barack Obama has a unique coalition of supporters. So it's hard to say what is partisan, Democrat versus Republican, versus what is for Obama against Obama. But it's clear, like Curtis says, that the population of the United States is changing. I think in 2008, whites were 77, 78% of the vote. This year there was 72% of the vote. Republicans will never probably break 10% or so of the black vote. Sometimes maybe we get 15%. And then you have Hispanics who, the interesting thing about Hispanics, they vote at extremely low rates. So, and yet socially they're very conservative. They would look in terms of their opinions like Republicans. And I think, George Bush 43, was very good at reaching out for the Hispanic vote and did well. I think he got like 45% of the Hispanic vote. But that was definitely not there for Mitt this year. And then the other thing is, of course, the gender gap, which still exists. I mean, if you're married and you're a man, you vote very much Republican. If you're married and a woman, white, it's about 50-50. But then unmarried men and unmarried women, vote Democratic.
Famously, in this election, Romney was roughed up on what he thought was going to be his best asset, his record of success as a businessman. And a lot of that, I think, had to do with the negative ads and I guess the negative research. You guys help us understand the dynamic of that. How did it happen, and were you surprised at the lasting impact of that early advertising?
Well, I mean, I think Obama had the benefit of obviously not having a primary, and he knew who his opponent was going to be. He had all that time to go out there and make his case and lay the groundwork, and I think you would probably agree with this, and paint him the way he wanted to paint him. And that was somebody who was not quite the businessman you thought he was. And Romney, whether he was because he was involved in the primary or just didn't have that great of a defense, really didn't do anything to counter that. And I think so early on, that's what happened. But, as you got into it, as far as, the negative ads and the research that went into them, I would say that, Al and I have been doing this for 18 years, and I think you would agree that we've not seen, and not just in the presidential election, but campaigns across the country, this much negative campaigning, this negative ads, a lot of things that weren't even based on facts. I mean, you could watch Romney's last ads in Ohio where he was saying that that Chrysler was sending these jobs to China to build Jeep, which was not true. A lot of the stuff was based on nothing. And at the end of the day, I think that catches up with you. I think Alan made a good point. We were driving up today that you think that, okay, well, it doesn't matter anymore because so much of this stuff's coming out with no facts to back it up. But I think the fact that Obama did win and the way he won tells you that voters did see through that, and they did, understand at the end of the day what the facts were and what they needed to look at and what they needed to see.
Given the fact that negative research is what you do for a living, is a negative campaign music to your ears?
No, not at all. It really all depends on where it's coming from. I mean, there's basically three components that can come into play. Whether it's just ideological differences, which fair enough, we don't all agree politically, or whether it's based on documented research, which is what we do, and obviously we have a special warm and fuzzy feeling about that, and we like to think that we're looking for the truth about the candidates, or whether it's stuff that's just made up. And unfortunately, a lot of what gets put out there now is just made up. And it just is truth by repetition. And a lot of that has to do with the internet because, somebody puts it on a blog, and I mean, both sides are guilty of this. And I mean, Michael and I probably think that the Republicans are worse because that's our position on everything, but
We are worse.
But anyway, when I see a negative campaign that is built around documented facts, that is music to my ears. But when I see something that gets legs and that I hear people talking about it and I know that there's no truth to it or it hasn't been documented or someone is forwarding it around on Facebook, even if I agree with it and there's no citation that tells you where this information came from, that's very frightening to me because it shows you how the electorate can be manipulated by untruths. And I think even though we are involved in negative politics, we really are kind of partial to the truth.
Curtis, you've seen a lot of campaigns. How did this one compare to the others in terms of negativity?
It's probably more of it. And I have a question for Will, or maybe Charles, to what extent was another good Mississippian, Stuart Stevens, responsible for the tone of the campaign? Stuart Stevens is from Jackson and
Yeah.
certainly deeply involved with the campaign, may have been running it. Will?
Will knows Stuart. Describe what Stuart's role was, and then give us your impression generally of where the campaign went right and where it went wrong.
I've known Stuart since, I think I met him in 1978 when I was working in Thad's first campaign. And he was the campaign manager for John Henson, who was Thad's AA, who won Thad's congressional seat. And so we've been friends ever since, and I worked for Mitt in the first campaign, and we brought Stuart in as part of the creative team. He had been working for John McCain, and depending on who you ask, he was either let go or he resigned. And so we welcomed him in our campaign, and he and his partners, Russ Schriefer, after we lost last time, pretty much stayed with Mitt. So they were his sort of key strategists. So Stuart's background is in advertising. So he's one of the creative wizards that makes the ads, and I'm like the nasty money man that places the ads. So there's always some tension there. But Mitt had a lot of trust in Russ and Stuart. And, I like Stuart and I feel badly. I think, there's a lot of criticism within sort of the Republican Party establishment, of some of their decisions. And I agree with some of it. I think Stuart and Russ had this mantra for Mitt that it's all about the economy. And I told the campaign manager, I said, no, it's not just, Mitt's motto should be, it's not just the economy, stupid. Because people vote for the person. They don't vote based on issues. And knowing Mitt and Ann, he's a great guy. You would give him your money to take care of and your children. And the campaign did not let people know what kind of person he was. And like you said, I can't believe it came as any surprise that they were going to go out there and say, this is a rich, evil Republican, who's fired people. And the campaign sort of let the Obama guys do that for a couple of months in the summer without responding. So I think that was the key mistake. The other key thing in this race was just the mechanics of the campaign, is that the Obama guys have for 6 years had like not a half a dozen, they probably have several dozen PhD marketing sciences guys sitting up there in Chicago, who are mining what's called big data. And so in a race where where there's only a margin of 1 or 2 points, all that mechanical stuff really matters. And that is a key, I think that's a key thing that happened this year.
Talk a little bit about how you got started with that, with Bush, in identifying in a micro sense the voters, and how the Republicans lost the initiative there.
Yeah, so after the 2000 election, where our firm did the media buying for Bush, there was a feeling after the 2000 election that maybe was a little bit close, and that maybe we should look for some new stuff. So we went out, and what we started doing was buying consumer databases. So we would subscribe to these large databases that consumer marketers use, and then we kind of reverse engineered it to use it for politics. So, we figured out that, in retrospect, it seems sort of obvious, but Republicans like to watch NCIS. They like to watch good guy, bad guy shows. Democrats like to watch 30 Rock in 60 Minutes. Democrats, are watching soap operas. Republicans are watching sports, especially college sports. So we completely changed. And the other thing we learned, which was disturbing, is that Democrats who vote watch more television than Republicans who vote. So it's easier for a Democrat to get their target audience on television. You can pretty much put an ad on TV any time of the day and find a Democrat. If you're advertising...
Why is that?
It's... Well,
Go ahead.
We've tried to...
Everybody's waiting for the answer to that one.
We've tried to figure it out. And, frankly, I don't really care why that is that much, as long as I know that it's happening. But it partly has to do with age. It partly has to do with gender. Women watch more television than men. I really don't know why it is. I mean, Republicans, if you look at those consumer research data, Republicans tend to do more stuff except watch TV, right? So they're busy doing something else, I guess.
But now, Will, your research got trumped by the
Democrat.
Democrats.
Okay, so we did all this stuff in secret, right, after 2000. And then after we won in 2004, everybody's out there bragging about it, And the Democrats realized, whoa, that's embarrassing. And the guy who was head of the DNC then, Terry McAuliffe.
Yeah.
So he said, we're going to do this. And they made an investment in it. And Obama benefited from that in 2008. McCain's campaign was so disorganized that they never really got into the data. We lost the White House, so we didn't have the resources. We had an RNC chairman who was Michael Steele, who apparently was not into this stuff either. So right now there is a big sophistication, a marketing gap, which is embarrassing to me. And I don't like, Mitt went to the Harvard Business School. So that's one of the things I'm going to work on after this, is try to get back to parity with the Democrats.
Let's talk a minute about independent expenditures. And Alan and Michael, I wonder if you have, that clearly was a big part of the campaigns. I don't know how much impact it had, but do y'all have an impression about the independent expenditures?
The third parties and the super PACs? Yeah, we talked about this. We've talked about this a lot, actually. the Citizens United ruling just totally changed the face of politics. And the fact that you can dump this much money into a campaign and not really have to tell anybody where it's coming from has allowed, I don't know if it's corrupted it or perverted it, but it's changed it a lot. And you can have in the Florida primary, I think there was a study that was done that 100% of the ads that these third-party groups ran were negative, all of them. These guys aren't out to make no candidate look good. I mean, their sole purpose is to make the other guy look bad. And so I think, for better or for worse, that's the way politics is from now on. And that's why you're going to see so many more, negative ads on TV, because unless that's changed, and I don't think it will be anytime soon, you're just going to have these super PACs who do a lot of their own stuff. And they say, of course, the premise is that you can't have any contact with the candidate, that these are totally separate. But I think anybody with half a brain understands what happens in a campaign, and there is some level of coordination, whether it's somebody on the phone or not. There just is. So yeah, it's changed it just tremendously.
Charles, the most negative ad I saw during the campaign was one in our state Supreme Court race here in this district by some shadowy group claiming to be law enforcement, something or another.
Law Enforcement Alliance.
Yeah, and totally trashing Flip Phillips, and a lot of it's garbage. And nobody knew who they are, and we know why they're saying it. But, it was probably hundreds of thousands of dollars to essentially help influence the vote in the state Supreme Court race.
And it worked.
It worked. Josiah Coleman may have won anyway, but he certainly helped.
But that same group came out in a race that we did in the Attorney General's race, came out against our current Attorney General. It did not work in that race. So, I think there are a lot of factors involved. But yeah, that's a great example of the influence that these groups can have.
I'm going to ask Will a question, but I want to go to the audience here in just a minute and ask you for some questions. So start thinking about that. Will, you actually work for some of the independent expenditure rich guys. Tell us about that experience, and tell us how these rich people who spent millions and millions of dollars are feeling tonight.
They're not feeling very good. Especially the rich guys I had dinner with Tuesday night. I think that I was lucky in this, that I met one man. He was a great guy. His name was Joe Ricketts. And he was a stockbroker in Omaha, Nebraska. And he started Ameritrade. He said, I don't know when it happened, but the SEC got rid of the standard commission, so there was competition. And he said, I'm going to go out there and sell discount stock services. And everybody said, you're crazy. He was a Merrill Lynch guy. And so he's very independent. It worked out. He sold Ameritrade to Toronto Dominion Bank. That's why it's TD Ameritrade now. His children like sports, so he bought them the Chicago Cubs. And he flew me out to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where he has a large buffalo ranch. And I said, yeah, I will help you spend $10 million. He is very much, he's very frustrated about the level of spending, the debt. That's his issue. But it was fun for me because unlike Crossroads, which is the Karl Rove thing, which has, dozens of millionaires.
American Crossroads,
and then Restore Our Future. I got the privilege to work for one billionaire. So we could pretty much do creative things. So we had, a website, whychangemyvote.com. We had TV ads, but not that much. And one thing we did, which which is not done now, we did print advertising in newspapers. We printed up 4.5 million little magazine-style inserts in newspapers. It was called the Mitzine. And we had a crossword puzzle, and we had Brad and Angelina on the cover, and
And now looking on it, did it have any impact at all?
it had an impact on. You can't tell. That's the thing.
Yeah.
But I think what happened this year, you had all these outside groups, and they're all doing the same thing. They're all dumping another 30-second spot into the local news. There was diminishing returns. I mean, how many? So you watch the local news, and there are 8 political spots in the pod, back to back. And I think that model, you keep thinking that model has got to change.
So Michael said we'll see more and more of this. Do you think maybe, given the overload, we might see less?
Well, since I'm in the business of packing 8 spots into a commercial break, right now I would estimate between 5 and 10% of advertising budget goes to the internet. So that's growing, but I don't think it will change. It's not going to change in the short term.
So Michael's right, it's just going to get more and more.
Well, in terms of the negativity.
Well, I mean, negative ads, I think anybody would agree that they work. And, it's not a matter of whether voters like them or not, or sick of them or not. It's what they remember. And, studies have shown that they work, and that, it tends to sway certain people, certain groups more than others. And so, yeah, I think why would you not keep using them?
One of the first things our class learned was everybody hates negative ads. Why do they keep doing it? Because they work. Okay, I'd like to turn to the audience now and for questions. Yes, sir.
I think one of the things that we discovered in this election is that the polls were vindicated. But there were a lot of people who seemed to ignore the polls. They just went off on their own. Of course, Nick Morris is one of the famous examples. But I was just wondering, if I take that as evidence, take the polls as evidence, I'm wondering how the Romney people persuaded themselves that Romney was going to win, and you had all kinds of people,
Will?
from Rush Limbaugh on, talking about how Romney was going to win and win big. And what kind of evidence did they have?
Well, if you look at the polls, they went like this, right? Obama was ahead, and it narrowed. So once you start a trend in politics like that, it tends to continue. And I think Romney would have won if Obama did not have the better mechanical campaign. So Obama whipped out of the air through his marketing an extra 2 points. And, and there's a certain sense that
Whip that out of the air.
That whips us out of the air. No, I mean, all campaigns think that, that we're right and we've got the mandate. I remember in the 92 Bush campaign when I was communications director, the ill-fated 92 Bush campaign, is that, like, we were flying to Houston on election night in the plane, and we were trying to convince ourselves we were going to win. If you don't believe that you're going to win and you work in a campaign, you don't get out of bed in the morning. So it's just the way it is. It's almost,
You just have to persuade yourself that you're going to win regardless.
yeah, but I actually believed it this year. I thought we were actually going to win.
Well, no, I accept that. I'm just trying to figure how, without deluding yourself, you came to that conclusion.
No, I mean, I am a pollster. So mathematically, looking at the polls, you could make a cogent argument that Mitt was going to win or that Obama was going to win based on how you weighted likely voters. So it was a turnout issue, and Obama had the turnout machine that had been put together for the last 6 years, and we thought they can't do it again, and they did it again.
Polls are not infallible, though. I mean, they were certainly on target this time. You know, and Nate Silver with his 538 blog is incredibly accurate.
He's going to help you.
He nailed everything this year, but you go back to 2004, the exit polls totally screwed everything up, and everyone thought John Kerry was going to win that afternoon based on election polls. 2000, yeah, it went back and forth and back and forth. 1980, it was going to be a real horse race until the last day, and everything shifted to Reagan. Reagan won in a landslide. The polls didn't pick that up. So you know, there's reason to distrust polls. I think they're getting better and more sophisticated and more professional and less partisan. The ones that were most inaccurate this year were the ones that tended to be partisan. I think Rasmussen, in particular, tends to be has a Republican orientation, and that one was more wrong than anybody. But the polls, I mean, even in every Senate race, they were right. They were right on every single
Let's
Senate
make sure
race.
everybody gets a chance to ask questions. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, many people thought that Romney's 47% comment revealed the real Romney, and I'm just wondering, what was the reaction within the campaign on that? Too much about it.
You know, I was not in the campaign, so I don't know what the reaction in the campaign was. It was probably a cuss word, you know, like who had the damn camera in the room. And Mitt is not actually not like that. And I don't know why he said that. I just know that if you're a presidential candidate and they drag you to these fundraisers and people are asking you questions and you basically just want to say something and get out of the room, and he said the wrong thing. And it was a gift. It was a gift to the Obama campaign because it played right into the caricature that they had built of him, that he was a tax evading felon who was responsible for some woman in Ohio dying. You know, whatever that ad was that came on.
Alan, did you see it as a gift, the 47%?
Yes.
You right away?
Definitely saw it as a gift because it fell into the category of something that's true. So whether or not it reflected the Mitt Romney that you knew, it was something that he said in a candid moment to an audience that was receptive to it, and it was documented. So it wasn't something that someone just pulled out of the air and put in a blog and it got forwarded a gazillion times. I mean, not that it didn't get forwarded, but it was true and it seemed telling. So from our perspective, yeah, that fell into the category of a legitimate find.
Isn't that Jimmy?
Yes, sir.
Jimmy Carter's son that had.
I communicate with some scientists, and there is one distinguished scientist who goes on record as saying, it used to be that American scientists were approximately 50-50 aligned with one party versus the other. Now, more recently, it's 5% identify with Republican and 95% identify with Democrat. And the reason being they see the Republicans as old-fashioned, anti-intellectual, cold to death. And indeed, to some extent, there's some truth to that, in my opinion. There's this guy who's on the Science Appropriations Committee who talked rather harshly about scientists as coming from the pit of hell, trying to tell us we don't need a savior. And this kind of talk
So put a question mark on that. What's your question?
Okay, what about division? Whereas, do they come across as cold and remote versus Obama being warm and connected?
You study voter trends.
Well, I mean, it was, the interesting thing is that if you look at the data, the better educated you are, the more Republican you are, except then when you have a PhD, it goes back to Democratic. So I can't explain it.
Okay, that's a good answer. Yes. Margaret Ann?
Yes. Election was so close, and it just got closer and closer, like you said earlier, especially with looking at all the different polls. What does that say about the voters and what the country wants? And also, what does it say about the candidates that these parties are nominating? And do you think that it's unique to this campaign, or do you think that we'll see that just continue to go closer in future campaigns?
I think you've seen that in the last couple of cycles. It's been close, and it was certainly close this time. The country's divided, and that's totally apparent from everything you see and read and the folks you talk to. I don't think it's going to change. I think that you're still in the next cycle. It's still going to be very, very tight. But one side, I think both sides have to change to some degree. I don't know, maybe everybody's talking because the Republicans lost this time and got it handed to them so badly. But they've got to figure out what's left in their base. Is what's left in their base all white guys? I don't know, but they certainly didn't get the young people, and they didn't get the Latinos, and they didn't get the African Americans, and they didn't get the women. So, what's left in that group? And so they got to figure out what they're going to do next to appeal to those groups, or this is going to, I would think this is going to happen again.
The thing that always surprises me is after a presidential election, so Obama's won. If you look at the United States, a map of the United States of America where they color the counties red or blue, like the whole country is basically red. And then there are these pockets of blue. Mm-hmm. So there's the Republicans have lost the big urban centers, and we still have the House of Representatives. So we have a majority in the most representative body in the country, but it's becoming harder for Republicans to win a national election.
Yes.
So to follow up, is the Republican Party going to make a greater effort to appeal to people of color who voted against you?
Yes. Politics has changed in the sense that because of marketing science and computers and large databases, that talking to voters it's become more of a one-on-one transaction. So you can so I know that if you're a Latino and you speak a mix of Spanish and English, but you own your own home, you're much more likely to vote Republican. So you have to find the individual and persuade them. So the marketing of politics has changed. Even though you were talking about political ads, we'll still have political ads, but there's a lot that goes on in terms of one-on-one contact, door knocking, direct mail, phone calls. The internet allows you to specifically target people. So there's a lot of politics that goes on that we don't see. And I think that the Republicans have to do that and find people of color, younger people. The break was about at 45 plus. We won the 45 plus vote, and the Democrats won the under 45 vote.
Yes. Who else? Yes, sir.
You think the media protected the Obama campaign?
Oh, yeah.
CBS, I watched CBS, and Fox News, those three.
That was quick.
It was all on Fox News. The other didn't touch it. They would touch nothing negative about Obama. So was he protected?
Well, I love Charlie and Curtis, but most of my Democratic journalist friends, will admit that they're Democrats, and as Republicans, we grow up with that. It's like you can't get upset about it anymore. You know that they are, but it's annoying, like the whole Benghazi thing, right? That in Libya, if George Bush had been president and that had happened over there, like that would have been the news for weeks, and it sort of just went away. It wasn't interesting. To me, I found that disturbing, and I think now that the election's over, there might be a lot of news about what actually happened. That's the problem Obama has, is that, he got reelected. And now it could be ugly for a while, The 2016 midterms, when a president gets reelected, the next midterm election after that is always really bad. So, I wish him the best.
Sounds like it.
I'm going to retire from politics one more time, I think.
Another question. I wanted to ask all of you, what's the takeaway for the future here? Beyond the things we've discussed, every election seems to have something, okay, this is definitely going to be the way it is. Well, Alan, is there a takeaway in your mind?
Well, for me personally, there is. I mean, and professionally, and you have to take into account that, I'm coming from a perspective of a Democratic opposition researcher. But we, having done this for so long and have seen how the truth becomes less and less a part of the mix, and again, going back to the internet, it's just so easy to build a campaign around something that doesn't really exist or that it has no basis in reality. And I went into this election, you can say what you want, going back to the idea of whether it's ideological differences you have with Obama, or whether there's something that can be documented, or whether it's just, he's a Muslim, that wasn't born in this country. And I felt like there really wasn't a lot of new, strong negatives on him as an opposition researcher in this campaign. Everything pretty much was known. There was nothing that really got any traction. There was a whole lot on Romney, on the other hand, and both of them lie and exaggerate. And you go to factcheck.org and you can see they go through all of these. But I felt like in my opinion, that if the campaign that had the most negatives won anyway, that it didn't speak very well for finding out what is the true underlying facts about a candidate in the future. So I felt like the truth was sort of validated because it was all put out there, and the voters decided this was what we think is best. Now, that a lot of that is my own personal opinion, but I did feel like that the true negatives that had basis in fact did seem to resonate in the end. It wasn't just about whether or not the person, what you like them, or it might be ideological, and going back to what you were talking about. But I do think that the opposition research actually came into play and influenced the voters in a way that I wasn't sure was going to happen.
Michael, your takeaway?
Yeah, and my takeaway is very similar to that. There's a silver lining, whether you're a Romney supporter or an Obama supporter, which, of course, the silver lining is giant. But as far as my takeaway, that is that there's like an unlimited number of delivery mechanisms of information out there now. You're bombarded with so many things every day, most of which is based on nothing. And, I would say that with all of that, with all those things coming at the voters, we spoke about this at another thing we were at, that you almost felt sorry for voters that they had to decipher all this stuff that they had thrown at them. I mean, how do you do that? How do you go through and say, okay, is this true or is this not true? People have jobs. They're not like us. I mean, this is what we do. We sit there and determine what the truth is or what the facts are, but most voters don't. You know, they rely on what they see and what they hear, what they read. So, you know, I felt good that at the end of the day, with all these things, that they were still able to go in there and make choices that regardless of who they voted for, that was based on more than just things that had nothing behind them. And I think that speaks well for, you know, our voters and our system, our election system, and the country in general. So, you know, I didn't feel bad coming out of this at all that there was so much negativity, and that's because that's not going away. But that you had so much negativity and so much information, and voters still were able to do what they needed to do.
Will, your takeaway?
Well, I mean, Obama, you know, Hope and Change, Bring People Together, 2008, ran a purely negative campaign based on personal attacks against Mitt Romney, on like who Mitt Romney is. That was the basis of his campaign. Obama essentially ran the same campaign against Romney that Ted Kennedy ran against Romney when Romney ran for the Senate in Massachusetts. And it worked. It worked for Kennedy and it worked for Obama. You know, the interesting thing to me is if you think about the political ads that were on TV this year, like, you know, what ad do you remember? There was no sort of, you know, the Morning in America Again ad that Reagan had, or in the 2004 campaign, there was the Kerry windsurfing ad. I mean, the only ad I can remember is the ad that the Obama guys ran all summer long, which was Mitt singing America the Beautiful. You know, which was a personal mocking of Mitt Romney. And that's the thing that annoys me about this year's campaign.
But if you say the real Mitt Romney never came through to the public, isn't it the obligation of the campaign to put the advertising and all out? So there could have been better advertising?
It could have been, there could have been.
So isn't that a takeaway also? That you got to show your candidate at least as good.
You have to. I mean, Mitt overdoes the humility. He does a lot of good things, and he doesn't like to brag, you know, about it. And that from what I understand, that was a big tension in the campaign between the I think Stewart and Russ wanted, you know, it's the economy, stupid, and you had other people that said, let's talk about who Mitt is. And they tried to do some of that at the convention where they had these people get up there and talk about how great Mitt was. But at that point, after Obama had beat him up for 2 months, you know, it's probably too late then. Probably too late.
Mm-hmm. Curtis, you have a takeaway?
Yeah, I don't have any empirical evidence, but I think that there's a great frustration among the American voter, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, that over this gridlock, that nothing is getting done. And I sense that was a factor that augured against Romney and the Republicans in the end. I remember almost immediately after Obama was elected in 2008, you have people like Rush Limbaugh saying, we want him to fail, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that he fails. And I can't think of any Democratic commentator who said that even after that nasty 2000 election where the Democrats felt like they were screwed out of the election. And nobody says, well, we're going to make George W. fail. I think that there's a perception out there that the Republicans in Congress were obstructionist. It's not to say that Harry Reid is, the greatest compromiser in the world either, but it's a quote I wanted to draw from a book called It's Even Worse Than It Looks by a couple of friends of mine. We were all congressional fellows together more than 40 years ago, and they went on to become a couple of political scientists who are considered the best congressional scholars, Tom Mann and Norm Ornstein. And they say of the Republican Party, this is the Republican Party in Congress, quote, has become ideologically extreme, contemptuous of the inherited social and economic policy regime, scornful of compromise, unpersuaded by conventional understanding of facts, evidence, and science, and dismissive of the legitimacy of its political opposition, all but declaring war on the government, close quote. And I think that that was not unhelpful to the Republicans this week.
In that regard, if you saw Speaker Boehner's comments yesterday, he made a point of saying, we want President Obama to succeed. And I think he was trying to dispel that notion from before.
Meanwhile, Mitch McConnell was saying the opposite.
Yeah, right. Well, this has been a good discussion, enlightening in so many ways. One of the great things about politics is that you get to do it all over again. And,
Oh, God.
And it is never the same. And the outcome, no matter what we say here, is never certain. And I'm reminded of the comedian impersonator Rich Little. Some of you will remember him. And he talked about the evening before the presidential election in 1968, when Hubert Humphrey said to his wife, now this is the impersonating routine of Rich Little. Hubert Humphrey said to his wife, Muriel, just think, tomorrow you're going to wake up with the President of the United States. And Muriel said, am I going to Dick's house or is he coming to mine? So it's the uncertainty of this that keeps us all going. I want to thank our panelists. It's been a terrific evening. Thank all of you for coming.